I'm the dungeon coach, and resistance in Dungeons and Dragons doesn't make sense to me. I don't feel like just cutting everything in half is always the way to go. So here's why it feels off, a solution you might like, and a ton of different homebrew inspiration so you can find that right fit for your game. The first time this felt off for me as a DM is when I had a tiefling in the group, and they were all level 1, and they wanted to sleep in the campfire. Now, tieflings are resistant to fire damage. I think this is where she was going with the idea. But if you just go into a bonfire, you're going to take some damage. So let's just say for this campfire example, she'd take 5 damage and resistance with half that and round down to 2 points of fire damage. So how resistance currently works, it wouldn't make sense for her to be able to literally sleep in the fire because she'd be constantly just taking 2 damage. But go with me on this because this is where it starts to not make sense. Because if you take that same level 1 tiefling and put it in front of an ancient red dragon, the dragon breathes 50 points of fire damage on this character, but they half it to 25. They just reduced the amount of fire damage they took by 25 points. So you're telling me a character can reduce the damage they take from fire more effectively the worse it gets? I don't feel like that's how this works. You build up a threshold or a tolerance to this type of stuff. So I would have wanted this tiefling to be immune to this little measly fire damage from the coals of a campfire and still get messed up by a fire dragon breath. And the last problem here before we get into a solution is this is not scalable. A level 1 tiefling's fire resistance is just as effective as a level 20. Because once you have fire resistance, you just have it and you always half the damage. Anything beyond fire resistance would be fire immunity, and that's real strong. So then how do we do this? How do we have small measly fire damage be absolutely nothing that you're basically immune to, but then still have big huge fire damage like dragon's breaths or something, still be scary? Some of you might already know where I'm going with this, but I'm going to steal some inspiration from Pathfinder 2nd edition. And if you like this homebrew, there's a bunch of other stuff that we can take and steal from Pathfinder 2. But I'm also going to take this system and run with it and give you guys a bunch of different options for how you would want to implement this at your table, whether it's for everyone or just monsters. You'll see what I mean. I call this homebrew system Resistance X because it sounds super cool that way. The X can represent any number that we'll scale here in a second, but for the sake of this tiefling, let's call it Fire Resistance 5. If you have Fire Resistance 5, that means every instance where you would have taken fire damage, instead you subtract 5 from it before you take that damage. 5 less every time. So for that little campfire example, if you're going to take 5 damage and you have Fire Resistance 5, you would take no damage. Basically, from any source of fire damage that would be 5 points or lower, you would be immune to that level of damage. But if you were in combat with a wizard and they hit you with a firebolt for 8 damage, you would subtract 5 from that and you would still take 3 damage. And if we stop and compare that to the rules as written half damage, that 8 damage would normally go to 4, so it's pretty similar. Or at least it can be for different levels of damage. But if we take this same Fire Resistance 5 and apply it to the ancient red dragon breath, and 50 points of damage would subtract 5, and you would still take 45 points of damage. So now you're immune to the little damage and you still get messed up by the bigger damage. And this is also scalable because you can always change that Fire Resistance 5 to Fire Resistance 10. This mainly feels good to me because of another homebrew system I use in my games called bonus level up perks, where every time one of my players levels up, I give them a cool bonus feature. Could be something small or could be something big, but with this tiefling, I can increase that every so often. It's usually something small and flavorful, but this is a great time when they get to level 3, now they have Fire Resistance 10. Maybe for some tieflings, that's where I'd stop because that feels right for that character. But if the tiefling really wanted to embrace their infernal heritage of fire, maybe I keep amping that up to 15, 20 or more. Timeout. I'm going to share with you guys a DM mistake story. And I haven't done this before. And if you want to see a whole video on this, let me know down in the comments. But I gave a ring of poison resistance to my party at level 2. This little ring became the bane of my existence over the entire span of the 3-year campaign, where this one paladin probably saved himself from thousands of points of damage overall. Because resistance, halving damage, at first it really wasn't that bad, but then later on in the campaign, they were supposed to go up against this very intimidating ancient green dragon. I threw this thing at my party when they were only about level 10 or so, and it was going to be a really big challenge. And if you know me at all, you know I homebrewed the crap out of that thing, so it was hard. In order to even stand a chance, they had to go around through this dragon's lair, secretly trying to collect extra boons to be able to take this thing down. After all the preparation, the moment was finally here, and I opened up with a crazy combo of a cloud kill and poison breath all in one. This was all directed at the paladin because I wanted to really put him on his heels and make him scramble a little bit. But he was resistant to all poison damage because of that little ring I gave him at level 2. But that entire fight and a bunch of other stuff that happened should be in its own video. But what I learned is resistance is very strong, especially when you scale it up to higher levels. But instead, if I were to give him that ring and it was a poison resist 10 ring, it'd still be really strong and feel really awesome whenever they're at low levels and do what I wanted it to do. But then as they leveled up, they might have to find new and different tools to be able to tackle this type of stuff. Or maybe if he did really want more poison resist, he could take that magic ring to a magic shop and they could boost the resistance of that magic to poison resist 20. New homebrew mechanic right there of magic boosting. Man, this was a long time out. Let's get back to it. Don't get me wrong, I will still use the rules as written resistance in some of my campaigns because at the end of the day, everybody has to be on the same page about what they feel good about. In fact, I have a whole video about how to implement homebrew rules into your game, but one of the examples I'll use here is if I wanted to try out this resistance system, you could use it specifically for one monster. It would let everybody be able to test out and see this mechanic in action against one special unique creature. Which brings me to all these homebrew ideas that I got for you. What if you gave monsters or unique types of armor physical resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing to have a physical resistance of 10? What if there was something like elemental resistance 15, where it only affected fire, thunder, lightning, and cold damage? Corrosive resistance 5 for acid and poison. Or what if there was an absolute resistance where any type of damage the creature took had that subtraction off of it? This would be really cool for a unique monster to give it an absolute resistance of 15, to where you had to deal 16 damage to it to even scratch the surface. Now, a creature like this you wouldn't want to give a huge health pool to, but your party would have to work creatively and think of how can we deal a lot of damage in one moment. Or to keep playing around with this mechanic, what if a creature was immune to all types of damage except they had fire resistance 10? So the only way to deal damage to this creature, no matter how big or small it is, was to deal fire damage to it. Who in your party can deal fire damage? Who is going to have that moment to shine? Or I just thought of this, give a monster 1 hit point, but give them a high resistance threshold. Absolute resistance 25, see who can kill it. These are my favorite parts of the videos because I just get a riff and homebrew with you guys. But what if you take this in a whole new direction now, and instead of this resistance being an instance of every single time you take damage, what if it's based on every round? So for example, if you had something like fire resistance 10, that would represent how many fire resistant points you have for the whole round. So for this example, let's say you're fighting a bunch of really weak wizards and you have your fire resistance 10, and let's say early on in the round you get hit for 4 points of fire damage, that fire resistance 10 would go to 6. You still would take no damage to your actual health though. Later on in that same round, the second wizard hits you for 4 more points of damage. You subtract that 6 down to 2 now. You still have fire resistance 2 for still this same round. It's your turn, you get to go and do whatever you do, but then that final wizard goes and hits you with 4 more points of fire damage, but you only had 2 more points of fire resistance left for that round. You lose that and you now take 2 points of damage. This kind of makes sense to me because technically in combat, it all happens in the same 6 seconds. So that fire resistance 10 would be the amount of fire resist you have for that round. This can also be really cool when applied to monsters because this gives people more chance to try and get those higher thresholds down before it resets at the beginning of the next round. There's a ton of different ways to narratively describe what kind of mechanics are going on with this creature, but maybe it has such a rapid regeneration that as they're hacking it down, it's literally healing itself, and they need to do a certain amount of damage to get over that threshold to be able to deal true damage to it. Or maybe there's some sort of barrier or force field that it has that they have to hack down and hack through to be able to hit it before it resets at the beginning of the round. My goal here, as usual, is to give you guys another tool that you can use at your disposal when it comes to resistances. Because if you want to keep everything rules as written when it comes to resistances, that's totally fine. Keep having all that damage, but maybe use this cool mechanic for your monsters. But sometimes you could use normal resistance for your monsters as well to keep your players guessing. Timeout. If you guys didn't already know, every single month I offer brand new homebrew PDFs, each with a different theme that I give my Patreon supporters every single month. Each PDF lasts for 2 months, so whenever you join, you get this month's and the month that came before. Technically, I make 3 PDFs every month and spread them across 3 different war tiers. And the entire thing has an overall theme that I've already done: Icewind Dale, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Wild Magic, and this month I have a custom city that I built from scratch, including a custom map that I had drawn for it, every single shop, building, town, different districts and everything, NPCs in there, quest givers, encounter tables to roll on, and entire adventure hooks. So if any of that sounds good to you and you want to help support what I do here, because it's the best way to do it, click the link down in the description. So a big thank you to all you guys for making this dream of mine possible. Keep homebrewing out there, stay creative, and think outside that box. Peace.